I'll never forget my visit to Espoo in Finland, the headquarters of Nokia, June the 29th of 2007, as I'd been granted an interview with the CEO of Nokia about the iPhone. Now, in hindsight, it wasn't just another day or just another interview, because June the 29th was the release of the very first iPhone. It kind of felt like minutes before Hiroshima would be taking off. It was quiet, nothing was happening, no panic, and for that sake, no interest in what was going on 5,400 miles away in Cupertino. The iPhone will have absolutely no impact on us, the CEO told me, adding, "We are Nokia. The iPhone is just some temporary new gimmick." Welcome to a new season of M&M Show. Let's talk about innovation. Let's begin the show. Hey everyone, welcome to all our viewers across the world, our World Business Forum audience, and all our Chief Executive Magazine readers. I'm Martin Lindstrom, your co-host, along with my dear friend and the world's #1 leadership coach, Marshall Goldsmith. Now, Marshall is a member of the Thinkers 50 Hall of Fame and has written some of the most iconic books out there. And guess what, everyone? Today is Marshall's release date of his next, I'm sure, bestseller, The Earned Life. Lose regret, choose fulfillment. It is simply a must read. Seriously, if there's one book you have to read this year, it is The Earned Life. So keep an eye out for our special series on The Earned Life, which will run later on this month and next month, where some of the most respected icons will join us to talk about their earned life. Marshall, you must be so excited.
Oh, I'm very, very excited. Thank you so much for the little plug for my book. Yeah, very, very excited. Looking forward to it. And one of our guests today, Safi, is actually a star in the book. I talk about him in the book.
Oh, you go. There we go. We have a double plug going on. Now, listen, I have to ask you, Marshall, what did you learn through the process of writing that book?
You know, the one thing on that book that's really struck a chord on people is the problem with achievement. And we're talking to Safi a little about this. We talk about all the great things that come from achievement and the problem, especially of getting fixated on results. I've come to the conclusion it's got to be one of the biggest problems we have in our society, at least with the people I work with. I'm used to work, and you know, all these people in our coaching group, they're all hyper achievers. Well, now it's like, here's some issues that are problems with hyperachievers. And one of them is over focus on results and how it screws up your head in life.
So how do you handle that when you now have to sell millions of books, not to focus on the results?
Well, that's a very good one. I've been working on it. And you know what? I'm going to have a good time. I'm going to have a good time regardless. Sell millions of books, have a good time, but don't sell. And look at it this way. I've already sold 3 million books. So let's say, do I really believe that selling 3.2 million is going to make me happier? Probably not.
Everyone listen out there. This is advice from Marshall. And listen, by the way, if you have any comments or you have any questions or anything like this, just drop a note just beneath here. And by the way, if you like this show, don't forget to press the like, the follow, or the subscribe button. Now, coming back to my little Nokia story, in fact, that interview was never aired as I left the lobby of this fancy new Nokia headquarters. A person ran from the comms department, hunted me down, demanding me to hand over my video recording. Now, perhaps they realized that the real consequence of iPhone was more severe than they thought. I guess I'll never find out. But today's conversation is all about innovation. And frankly speaking, I can't think about any better suited person to join our group today than our two guests. You know what, Marshall? You talk about Safi. You've written about him in the book. You go for it, my friend. You present. You introduce Safi.
I never introduced you yet. So anyway, I got
That's okay.
You forgot. We are here with my great friend, Martin Lindstrom. Martin is the world's most interesting human being. He's the world's #1 expert on branding. He's one of the Time Magazine 100 most influential people, Thinkers 50, one of the top business thinkers in the world. He's an incredible author of biology, small data, Ministry of Common Sense. Most important though, he's a good guy. He's a good guy. He's got a great sense of humor. We always have fun working together. And so, you know, very, very honored to be here with my comrade. And we have had the privilege of interviewing some of the most amazing, we've had Nobel Prize winners. We've had all these great people, authors, scientists, just brilliant people. So very, very honored to be working with my good comrade, Martin. Now, I get to introduce Safi too. This is a double happy day for me. Safi Bahcall. Safi Bahcall is a wonderful guy. He's got a BA from Harvard. He has a PhD in physics from Stanford. Now, Martin, I think Safi's IQ is roughly equal to yours and mine combined.
Yeah, I could imagine.
So Safi is a very, very smart guy. He is president of Obama's President Council on Science, or he was a member of that. He wrote a book called Loonchach, which is a fantastic book, and it was ranked #1 most recommended book by Bloomberg in terms of all business books. He's been a CEO, he's been a founder, and he has started businesses, and you know, he's just a great guy, and he's also willing to help out. I have Safi actually work with my clients to help them out because he's got an interesting way of looking at life. And so I always have him kind of, you know, talk to my clients and try to help them. So Safi, thank you so much for joining us. Yay.
Thanks for having me. And every time I talk to you guys, Marshall or Martin, I just feel like jumping out of my chair and running around the block. You guys have so much energy. It's like one of those, you know, in Pulp Fiction where the guy jabs him with adrenaline. Whoa, I'm awake. I'm ready to go right now. Let me at him, coach. Let me at him.
Now, Safi, I could ask you other questions that had nothing to do with my book, but that wouldn't help me sell books. So the first question I've got to talk to you is my book. You, Safi, were part of the inspiration for the book, and you made a comment because we were talking about happiness and achievement. And could you share that comment? Because I have quoted you. By the way, today I'm on 5 podcasts. I probably I quote you constantly on this comment. So what was your comment about happiness and achievement?
Thanks. Sure. And by the way, I really want a copy of this recording so I could forward that intro to my mother, you know, hopefully before dinner tonight. No, the comment you mentioned, it came from, I don't know how many people listening are aware, but you do these sort of weekly, we were doing during the pandemic, these sort of weekly CEO group therapy sessions.
Right.
And everybody, you know, signs up to answer the Marshall Goldsmith 6 questions. And one of those questions is, you know, where are you? You know, have you done your best to be happy? What's your score 1 to 10 on the past week or, you know, week or month or whatever? And I kept, you know, self-grading myself as a 5, you know, on a 1 to 10. And after maybe 2 or 3 sessions of this, Marshall, who's there on the Zoom grid, is like, listen, kid. And he's like jumping out of the Zoom grid and his hands are like, I am going to come out there and strangle you if you don't get that score up higher. Why are you a 5 every single week? You better get that score up. And I was like, oh my God, who is this guy? I had just met Marshall. We're like, okay, let me think about it. And the next person to speak was this Hall of Fame NFL player named Curtis Martin. And he went through the same questions and he gave himself a 9 or a 10 on happiness. And I noticed it was the second or third time in a row he's a 9 or 10 on happiness. I'm like, I asked him, I said, listen, you know, I've worked hard my whole life, you know, started a company, you know, academic, all that stuff. This guy is a Hall of Fame NFL, you know, a player, a competitor, started a private equity firm. He is no less driven than I am, no less goal-oriented, anyone who's in the Hall of Fame, yet he's a 9 or a 10 on happiness every week, and I'm a 5. So I said, Curtis, like, what's your secret? And he said, you know, well, when I was growing up, by the time I made it to 12, half my friends were dead, and, you know, my grandmother didn't have a place to live and so forth. And he said, like, every week, if my grandmother has a place to live, my friends are alive, my family is good, that's a 10 for me. And I realized that happiness and achievement are 2 different variables. If you think of it as a mathematician or a scientist, they're 2 axes and they're independent. They're entirely independent. You could be achieving and miserable, or you could be achieving and happy. You could be not achieving and miserable or not achieving and happy. They're just independent. And it's up to you to choose where you want to be on that one happiness axis.
You know, I just love that. And the great Western ethos says you will be happy when you get the money set or they achieve this crap. And one thing I told Safi is, how much do you achieve? I mean, look at your bio there. You're already at 99.999 on achievement. So I said, what you're going to be happier when you get up to 99.9999 at a certain level? It gets wacky. What's the difference? Now, back to this things not being correlated. I got another question for you. This relates to the concept of soldiers and artists. And I love this because it's back to being correlated. So many people are trying to make artists soldiers and soldiers artists at the same time. You have a different attitude. Share that with us.
Yeah, you know, one of the things I write about is there's so much focus on culture. When I first started as a CEO, I read everything I could get my hands on about how to be a better leader and a manager and so forth. And all of that stuff was about culture, culture, culture. Yet you would read these things about this, you know, CEO saying, actually the head of Nokia, Martin was just telling the story, just before the iPhone was talking about, you know, what a great culture. And that's how we're so innovative is the great culture. You know, the head of BlackBerry said that, the head of Blockbuster, you know, the head of Enron, the head of G. And then, you know, 1 week later, the company's gone. So how could it be all these people talking about what a great culture and people writing about their culture, and then 1 week later you read in the same newspaper, in the same journal, the company's dead? And so what I focus on is structure. And to get to your point, Marshall, you can think of, actually, you know what? I have a prop. I don't know how many people are visual, but this is a glass of water. When I stick my finger in, and I can twirl it around and the molecules just slosh around my finger. And that's true for every liquid all the time, except when I lower the temperature. Right at 32 Fahrenheit, there's a massive change inside this glass of water, and the liquid suddenly freezes, and I can't put my finger in anymore. Why? They're exactly the same molecules. So why do they suddenly change behavior? Now you can think of culture as that behavior. Are the molecules sloshing around, or are they totally rigid? And you can think of structure as what you do to change the temperature. And here's why it really matters. So many CEOs are like, okay, everybody, let's sing Kumbaya and hold hands and innovate faster and better. That's like going to a block of ice and yelling at those molecules. Okay, molecules, just loosen up. Right. Well, how much is that going to do to the block of ice? Well, nothing. But you know what will melt that block of ice? A small change in temperature. Small change in temperature will melt steel. And so that's called a phase transition. And so what I write about is how you get phase transitions inside of organization and what are the underlying forces. But the big point there is the artists and the soldiers. The artists are the ones you can think of who are working on the new, who are focused on the crazy new idea, and you want them to fail. You want them to try lots of stuff that fails. The soldiers are focused on time, on budget, on spec, right, delivering consistently to customers with quality. Right. Now, you don't want them to fail. You don't want the guy working on parachutes to say, let me try some experiments, go up, and we'll see if it works. Right? No, you want the parachute to be made the same exact way, but you want the artist to try lots of stuff, because if the artist isn't trying lots of stuff, isn't going through the 9 things that fail, you'll never discover that 10th thing which changes the world. And you know who will discover it? Your competitor, or in the military, your adversary. And you'll see it when it's too late, when it's a bullet coming to your head. So learning how to love your artists and soldiers equally, understanding that they're different. So those two groups not only don't understand each other, they very often don't like each other. The group that's making the money rarely likes the group that's spending the money, and vice versa. Sometimes true in personal life, but that's a totally different topic. Right. So what you need to do is learn how to love your artists and soldiers equally, understand that you will always have this tension. They speak a different language. The English word risk, 1 word, 4 letters. It's a terrible thing to a soldier. You want to de-risk the battlefield. You want to improve your quality metrics. You want to decrease failure rates. But it's a wonderful thing to an artist. Imagine going to an artist and saying, you've really taken the risk out of your work. Well, that's an insult. Right. But it's a compliment to a soldier. These are 2 different languages. So CEOs and leaders who at the top are thinking like, I'm the chief innovation officer, everybody innovate, are making a mistake. They're saying, you guys, you really want the solid, the focus on time, on budget, on spec, and you want the liquid sloshing around, the crazy new ideas. If you tell everybody to be both, what do you get? Slush. You get a Slurpee. You get a gobbledygook mess where they're trying to be both artist and soldier, both liquid and solid. So that's kind of about the artist and the soldier. And one way I like to think about it, and then I'll stop talking and go right back to you, is the beautiful baby problem inside organizations. Artists think of their creation, and John, who's on our call, will be speaking next. It's a perfect person to talk about this, and he understands this deeply, I'm sure. Artists see their new creation as a beautiful baby, full of potential, whether they're biologists in the lab working on a new drug, or engineers working on a new code, or someone designing a coffee machine. Artists see their work as a beautiful baby, full of potential. The soldier sees a shriveled up raisin covered in vomit and poop. And that's the problem. Beautiful baby, vomit and poop. And they are both right. You want both inside your organization. You don't want to get rid of that tension. You want to lean into that tension. And your job as a manager or leader is to manage the touch and balance between your artists and soldiers. You want to be a gardener managing those 2 ecosystems, not a Moses standing on the top of the hill like you read about in most business magazines, anointing the chosen project. So love your artists and soldiers equally, be a gardener, not a Moses. End of story.
Amazing stuff. Listen, I want to ask you one thing here, Safi. When you talk about organizations and infusing energy into them and defrosting the frozen middle, as you talk about, how do you maintain that culture? Because today it seems like the Googles of the world are giving people a lot of granola bars and fancy hardware in the offices. Is that the answer? And what do you do when half of the folks are sitting behind a screen, while you are only one link away from just working at another place? How do you maintain that culture when the whole world seems to be going towards a direction where you don't have human interaction in the same format as we had just some years ago?
Well, I hope we will continue to have some human interaction. After all, that's what makes us human, and that's what brings so much joy in life. But if there's kind of one thing, when I work with executive teams or CEOs, and kind of there's a whole set of principles on structure. What gets measured is what gets managed. You can't measure it, you can't manage it. So if you want an innovation operating system, you want to build that system, it does start with, like, what are you measuring? For example, if you're measuring number of failures, hey, that's really good for the guy making parachutes or the guy building widgets. What's your number of metrics, number of products you're producing per day? But imagine going to the person who's working on kind of new ideas and saying, well, it's Wednesday. On Monday, you had 4.7 ideas. On Tuesday, you had 4.3. And I think it's Wednesday, it's 3 o'clock. We're only at 3.1 ideas. He's going to think you're a moron, and he's going to quit and go to a company that understands managing artists better. So first answer to your question is, what do you measure? And you better be very thoughtful about creating the systems and the measurements and the tools. One is tailored to the artist, which is things that they respond to. And the other is tailored to soldiers. And when I was, running these sorts of organizations, I had a different hat. The questions you ask of artists and what you celebrate with artists, including celebrating good fails, and what is a good fail and how do you celebrate it, is very important. And the question you ask soldiers, the kind of stuff I would review with my CFO on filing, quarterly reports. Did he get it? Did he close books within 15 days? Or this month it was 13 days. He was 13 days. Let's celebrate. Whereas with the artist or the scientist or the creatives, an original new idea or a great failure through which you learn something. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is kind of one thought. If there was one thing I try to leave people with and try to remind them, it's this. When someone presents to you a new idea or a new project, get out of your vocabulary, just strike out the phrase, that will never work, and replace it with the question, what experiment might we run? That's it. If there was one thing I could wish for every team, that's it. I cannot tell you how many companies have gone down in flames. Nokia was one example because, almost, Martin didn't mention the story, but 2 years before the iPhone launch, there was a small group at Nokia which had been working on a secret project where they developed, a touch screen, a camera, and they came up with this crazy idea. You know what? Suppose we here's our totally crazy idea, our loonshot. Suppose we have these little things in the cloud that everybody can download. And they presented it to senior management at Nokia. And what did the senior management at Nokia said? They said, that will never work. Had they rephrased that with, like, what experiment can we run to test our assumptions that it will never work, they might be dominating the phone category today. So that's kind of if there was one thing, that would be it.
Amazing. Guys out there and girls out there, isn't it amazing in terms of simplifying things? In fact, Safi, I just spoke to one of the leading scientists. He actually developed the concept of mirror neurons. And he told me this morning that when you use metaphors, it's not just something you're using, it's actually hardwired into our brain. We have a vocabulary built into us. It's just crazy. Well, that's what Safi is doing very well. Okay, coming up, our next guest was raised in a tofu factory. 30 years later, his design can be found in the permanent collection at the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco. Now, John Maeda is widely recognized as one of the leading experts in the intersection of business and design and technology, or what he calls humanist technologist, named one of the 21st most important people in the 21st century by Esquire. In 1999, he was introduced to the New York Art Directors Club Hall of Fame. He was a professor at the MIT lab for 12 years, served on the board of directors at Sonos and at the advertising agency called Biden and Kennedy. And he also, by the way, joined eBay's design advisory board as chairman. And he is the author of a ton of books, including one of my favorites, which is The Laws of Simplicity. I think Safi will love that one. And his latest, How to Speak Machine. Welcome, John.
So glad to be here. I was listening to Safi's stuff and it's already phase changing my brain. So what a good use of my time. Wow.
So listen, why don't I outsource my job here? Safi, ask John a question.
John, you're now the CTO of Everbridge, is that right?
Yeah.
How do you identify some of these innovation challenges that we were just talking about? How have you seen that play out inside, now that you're not at MIT Media Lab anymore, a place that I love? Now that you are inside a large organization, what are the biggest challenges you're seeing to innovation, and how did what we just talked about resonate or play out in what you see day to day?
Well, I really enjoy how you frame that thinking of artist, soldier, Safi, because I know words are hard to pick. And so those are good enough, sort of strong, curiously strong words. And, regardless of where I've been in the past, I see that phenomenon of the phase change problem. Some are ice, some are liquids, some are gas. And you made me think that the challenge of getting the artist and soldier to work together, finding what's in common is so key, as you know. And you made me think about how I'm running off of one of my phones, the Wi-Fi hotspot. It's not perfect. It's gonna break out sometimes, but I have a backup if I can just use my other phone to build an audio connection. I was thinking how both the artist and the soldier are exceptionally good at being able to make do, improvise. An artist without the right materials will find a way to achieve their outcome. A soldier, if in battle, will invent ways to protect themselves if not given the right materials. And so I kind of think that they both have inventive force. And when things are challenging, as you know, that's when people start to actually have to, not necessarily innovate, but improvise. That thing that's in common of the artist and soldier, I find so interesting, having listened to you. I haven't been a Slurpee person. I'm a Coca-Cola, maybe cherry Coca-Cola Slurpee, who can phase change, as some of us can. And it's a terrible thing because you're not sure if you're ice or water, liquid, or, and sometimes you do become gas. I like this improvisation thing. I'm sure you thought of that. Let me interview you back. Like, what does that trigger in your mind?
Well, that's a great point. I'll go right back to my prop. You see this glass of water? It's not about the molecule. If you look at a molecule of water, is it a liquid or a solid? That's the wrong question. It can be both. Yep. If I take a molecule of water and drop it in this glass, what's it going to do? It's going to slosh around with all the other molecules. If I take a molecule of water and I drop it on a block of ice, yep, what's it going to do? It's going to lock and freeze. So, for example, you and I have probably both hired people from large organizations to come into a small entrepreneurial organization, right? That's the molecule that's in this very rigid place. As soon as you take that senior executive and you put them in a 50-person startup, guess what happens? Tie flies off, jacket flies off, and they're pounding the table about some crazy idea, just like the rest of everybody. That's the point about the molecule dropping it in the liquid rather than the ice. And that's the big point. It's about the structure. It's about the systems. Your point about the soldier on the battlefield, absolutely. When you create a life or death situation, you better innovate or you are dead. Guess what they're going to do? They're going to innovate. So it's about the systems that you place around people, not so much about, a CEO saying, all right, everybody innovate. Let me put some pictures of birds on the wall and, everybody hold hands and sing Kumbaya. No, it's
Right.
about what do I measure? What do I reward? What are the incentives in place? How do I ask the right questions? And you need to ask different questions of the artist and different questions of the soldiers and understand the failure mode in innovation, as you, John, know incredibly well. The failure mode in innovation inside organizations is never, never in the supply of new ideas. You put 10 people in a
Disagree
room.
with what you're saying, Safi. So I love how you framed everything, and the metaphors are powerful, and they enter my brain and they sort of like settle in and just start cooking and building a fire and whatever. But um, I, your metaphor of water, becoming different phases requires scientific understanding. So you're speaking a common language with me. And I think all leaders, whether they came from startup or from big corporation, they know that the speaking the language of the entity you enter is table stakes, the
Yep.
science per se. And I think that the only problem with learning the science of organization is it takes time. And oftentimes a new leader doesn't have time to be able to understand that. So, like, think of Sabi, think of a leader who was at the same place for like 10 years, left for 8 years, and came back. Can you talk about that advantage for a second?
I mean, absolutely agree with you. You have to understand the language of the people that you're speaking to. So I'll give you an example. I work with a lot of private sector companies, technology and media and entertainment, but also the military. So a lot of folks in the different military service branches have reached out to me, an intelligence community, and I spent a lot of time with them. I was just on the phone with them today. And on the one hand, of course, the language I use is specifically tailored, but it's actually fascinating when you can cross-pollinate the language. And I'll give you an example. If you want to launch a new project internally, one of the things that I get to is borrowed from my discussions with the military and the Navy specifically, and that is get quickly to boats in the water. What does that mean? It's exactly your point, John. You can talk about theory until you're blue in the face and no one gives a damn.
But have you served in the military, Safi?
Oh, no, I didn't. Not at all. I spend a lot of time working with them.
No, I understand.
That.
But
Yeah.
my point is that if you're a veteran,
Yes,
and you have gone to industry, when you talk with the Army, it's a powerful thing.
oh yeah.
When you bring that culture that you had and you change culture, change phase or whatever, and you come back, it's like magic.
Oh, that's using the right words, the right metaphors, the right language is very powerful with customers, with partners, with all of those relationships. Right. And that's an example. I use get quickly to boats in the water means don't worry about the theories, run experiments. Put the actual boat, don't talk about how you're going to build the boat, actually build a small boat and show it to people. That works so much better than talking about, actually happens very often in both large organizations and in the in private sector and in the public sector. They talk about how they're going to do something, like with the Navy with unmanned. I'm not saying anything out of school here, but there's a big task force. How do we create the next generation of unmanned weaponry? Well, you could create PowerPoints and write a PhD thesis on how to organize, or you could give 5 people a little bit of money and create something. That second way that actually goes in the water. It's the same thing. That's what I mean by get quickly to boats in the water. And John, that gets to kind of your point. You want to choose your language and choose your metaphors carefully. And actually, the be a gardener, not a Moses resonates. Love your artists and soldiers equally resonates because so many people, if they've grown up one way, and I'm curious about you because you've grown up with this artist designer mentality. If you grow up one way as seeing yourself as this visionary artist, like for example, the early version of Steve Jobs 1.0, his first time in Apple, you fall in love with the artist and you, in your organization, signal that you love the artist, which is what he did the first time when he said everybody is working on the Apple Free and the Lisa project is a bozo, and demotivated that group and people started leaving and Apple almost fell apart. They launched the Macintosh, which was a great publicity campaign, but it was a terrible product. It overheated. It was underpowered, and it sales tanked, and the company almost went bankrupt because Jobs focused on the signaling of loving his artist and demotivating his soldiers. When
Really?
he
That's such a I'm sorry. That is such a trivialization of the Jobs kind of legend as someone who was unusually facile at understanding technology. And I think what's interesting is that he understood that technology could be an art. Do you remember his thing for the Smithsonian where he said over and over that the computer is like a bicycle for the mind? And I think that ability to capture the power of computation was unusual in, to your point, an artist.
No, that was fantastic. That was when he came back after he had learned, spending a lot of time with Ed Catmull at Pixel, who had really mastered that. After he came back the second time, one of the first, so I spent quite a while with John Rubinstein, who created the iPod for him and worked at Next for him. And we spent a lot of time talking about this, but after he came back the second time, and Next did not go very well. It was a beautiful artistic product. I remember those Next cubes, but the company, it was a failure as a company. Except for the operating system, which they built, which was why it got acquired and why he came back to Apple the second time. But when he got back to Apple the second time, exactly what you said. One of the first things he did was promote Johnny Ive, who was this legendary designer who created all these beautiful Apple products. But the second thing he did was recruit a guy from Compaq Computer, whose nickname at Compaq was the Attila the Hun of inventory.
It was the most genius move to hire Tim Cook by far.
Right.
But I want to note that I did buy a Macintosh when it came out. I bought a Next Cube when it came out. So I have opinions about what you're saying, but keep on going.
Yeah, no. So when
I'm also a developer for Next, a developer for Mac. So I just want to.
I know. We can have some. I've spent a lot of time.
I just want to say to all the viewers out there, how do you run an interview show without asking a single question? You just invite Safi. The problem is when you invite Safi and he should be part of the M&M show, it will be called the S&M show. And it's not a very good title. No. You can say that if you get what I mean. This is amazing. I love you both. Marshall, run. Ask a question straight away, else we won't have a chance.
I have a question for John, and it relates to Safi. Now, Safi, a wonderful human being. As I recall, Safi, sometimes I remember giving him a little coaching about being lost in logic. He has this kind of scientific background, and we always deal with stupid logical arguments, pointing other people's comments were illogical, irrational. So I had to beat him about the head a few times on that one. So now I'm going to take the same concept and apply it to John. John, how do you do it? How do you, as an artistic kind of guy, a designer kind of guy, really make sure that you don't shove that down the rest of the world and communicate a sense of respect for other people with very different orientations than you have? And maybe you don't, but how would you recommend thinking about that or just trying to do it? Because it's hard. It is hard because we tend to value people like ourselves. And we all tend to devalue people who are not like ourselves. So how do you work around that as a designer and an artist?
Well, I think it's really important how, and by the way, Safi, I just love your works. I'm going to go buy all your books after this talk. So anyways, so the word artist and the word designer are terrible words because they mean too many things. When I ran Rhode Island School of Design, I had to find a way to explain the difference. And so I used to say that artists make questions and designers make solutions. And it's an oversimplification, as we're doing even with an artist and soldier, but it helps you understand that a designer has to solve a problem. They're hired to do that work. It's a commercial thing, like being an engineer. And an artist is free to think of questions, which, as we know, is the same as a scientist. And they don't have to live in the constraints of having to make money. They may get it from a research grant instead, or from someone who has a lot of deep pockets. But I think that the artist at the core is this idea of a kind of devotion to some concept that I don't care what you're thinking about. But if you look at all the great artists who ever succeeded, they were all market driven. They wanted to know what the market wanted, and they built it and manufactured at scale. So every successful artist actually listened to the market, was agile, adjusted over a period of years. Think of Picasso's different versions of himself. He was like David Bowie. He knew he couldn't keep doing that one thing and everyone's going to love it. So he had to change. He had to your point, Safi, experiment each time, being willing to not just fail to succeed, but to kill the success to find new failure to new success. And so that artist is actually very curious about what others think. The myth of the artist, however, through the movies and comic books, etc., paint the artist as someone who is fragile and starving, clueless, doesn't care about you, will pee in your fireplace, etc. This is just a myth, like the myth of a scientist or even a CEO. It doesn't speak the whole picture.
Well, fascinating stuff. Thanks, John, for sharing that. Now, okay, coming up, I asked the US head of Colgate-Palmolive to ask a seriously challenging question to our two guests. What the question is, and by the way, the answers for our guests is coming up soon. But before doing that, I just want to ask both of you, tell me, how do you maintain innovation and that entrepreneurial spirit in organizations when they really grow large? A lot of my clients, a lot of our clients have 100, 200,000, up to 1 million staff. They all want to be entrepreneurial. And either they start an incubator inside, which typically is being killed by the immune system, or else they end up with a Walmart idea where they, after a third attempt, is basically releasing it outside the organization to become successful. What's your take about that? Safi, do you want to start?
Yeah, now as you know, Martian, this is what McKinsey will spend a year on an organization. I'll spend a day with an organization. So to boil it down into 30 seconds, it's a little tricky, but here it is. The three places you can think of it, or I think of it now, I've spent a lot of time with a lot of these organizations. The three sort of failure modes that I see most often are around focus, framework, and friction. And there's solutions around each of those, but focus, that's a very common problem. That's sort of at the beginning of the innovation pipeline where a CEO says, okay, everybody innovate. And then people come back with like, great, this is awesome. Let's do it. Here's my idea for a new t-shirt. Here's my idea for a new credit card. Here's my idea for a new train. And this is like, wait, what? That's not what we were talking about. And then everyone gets demotivated. Focus is about saying of the 20 things we could innovate on, of the 20 areas, half in product, half in strategy, which 17 areas will we absolutely not innovate on in the next 2 years? What that does, and I think John would appreciate this as an artist, it's the same thing as a haiku. It liberates creativity in a certain way by saying only these are the three areas, and it actually unleashes quite a bit of creativity. That's focus, a typical failure mode. And when you don't have that, what you see is what I call like spaghetti innovation. Companies just throwing spaghetti in the wall, seeing what sticks. It's very demotivating. When you can be very clear about what you won't innovate on, surprisingly, it's actually very motivating for people. Framework, if there is no framework for where do ideas go, which is very common, I do interviews and say, well, tell me about what a new idea, how does it go? And like, I don't know, I email it to my boss. Well, how does it get funded? I don't know, I ask somebody. When there is no useful framework, even a light framework, everything's got to be kept really light and fast if you want to run experiments at pace and scale. What do you get? You get zombie projects, things that should have been killed years ago, just keep going and going. What do you get? You get lost in the closets. What do I mean by that? Oh, somebody at a staff meeting a year ago said this new idea, everybody applauded, it was great. And then what happened a couple of days later? I don't know, we forgot about it. I went in the back of the closet. You wake up one morning, open the paper, boom, your competitor just created it and your business line is dead. Or you get, and again, you don't have the right framework, you get this third thing I see all the time, premature scaling. hey, our customers want, this is actually a real world example. I won't mention the company, General Electric. I won't mention that name at all. Our customers want, batteries. Awesome. Let's go buy a battery company for $2 billion. Great. Oops, they didn't want batteries from us. Sorry about the $2 billion. Premature scaling. So if you don't have the right framework, you don't have the right focus. Finally, what really kills, as John will know, and all of you guys who've been inside organizations, the friction. I want to run an experiment in one day and $100, right? A business experiment, not 2 years and a 97-page PowerPoint business plan. One day and $100. Great. I call up finance. I need you to cut a check to this vendor. Awesome. That should be about 8 weeks. I need IT to mock up an A/B testing thing. Great. You're in the queue. You're number 478. Should get that by August. I want to hire this non-traditional guy. Great. We'll put him in the HR hiring queue. Get back to you in about 6 months. Well, that you just crushed, you have suffocated your ability to run experiments. So that, how do you solve that? Well, that's about how you create two-track management. One for protection of the core. You need that. You have billions in sales. You do need the fiduciary responsibility, but one for speed. So you need to focus on the system so that you have a dual management. So those are some of the areas, the sort of failure modes, and there's various things that you can do to kind of address those failure modes inside large organizations.
Well said on this one. Okay, I think it's time to run the BCG Minute. And by the way, let me just introduce you to today's CEO. I actually asked Jesper Nordgaard, the president of Colgate Palmolive in the US, to challenge the panel. Let's run the BCG Minute.
Hi there. My name is Jesper Nordengard. I'm the president of Colgate Palmolive in North America. I have a question for the M&M panel. I would like some input into how you build a creative culture, but also an entrepreneurial culture in a big organization that's been around for a long time. I'm looking forward to your input.
Now, Safi, I have a feeling of your answer will be focus, framework, and friction, but I may be wrong here. So I'm going to farm it straight over to you, John. What's your answer to this one here?
Well, now that I've become a Safi disciple, I'm going to just sort of use his frameworks to kind of frame what I believe. I loved, Safi, when you talked about achievement and happiness. And when you think of a culture that's built itself over decades and succeeded in spite of its own lack of innovation, the achievement has happened, and happiness is extremely strong. And don't you dare mess with the achievement, because you're going to bring our happiness down. And it made me think about how people who are entrepreneurial, innovative, come across as unhappy. And they're unhappy with not having achieved something that they thought they could achieve. I was thinking about Marshall sold millions of books. Safi, you wish your book will sell 3 million and beat Marshall's record. Sorry, Marshall. But that's something that's on your list because you are unhappy 5, and you think you'll be at 9 or 10 if you achieve it. But as you know, that doesn't happen in people who are entrepreneurial. One of my favorite interviews in the Times was about the director of Birdman, Iñárritu. And he tells a story of, everyone, like when you're on the way up, everyone's like, you're amazing, you're amazing, you're amazing. And sometimes some people, they let it get in. And so Iñárritu said that his father told him, when you get praise, spit it out like it's poison, because you'll be stopped from evolving. And that's a little bit dark, and it requires a certain level of privilege to say that. But unhappiness, it looks like they're unhappy, but they're happy because they're trying to achieve a goal. And that's a different kind of thing than just the happy thing.
Beautiful, well said. Marshall, any reflections?
Oh, I love this talk. I loved everybody's talk. I'll give John some coaching later. I think he needs help. But I've already, poor Safi, I've helped him many, many times in the past. So John, and by the way, John, the reason that Safi appears to be such a good guy today is because of my intensive coaching. So just in case there was any confusion.
Do I have to pay you for this coaching, or how does this work at this show? Is this like a pro bono, or how does this work here?
Just buy 10 of his latest books. That's the only thing.
Yeah.
And then you get it free of charge.
I'm gonna pay for the 4 million.
I
4
will
million,
give you
Marshall.
your coaching later. I'll give you coaching. I've already helped Safi. So, you know, this is my do-gooder project in life, is helping people like you guys. So I will correct you later, but that's okay. We'll get to that point later. Martin, in summary, I love these two guys.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, so do I. And you know what? I think it's time to run the mural moments. Should we do that just to have a little bit of a summary from mural?
Yeah, I don't see how you're going to do it, but good luck.
And neither do I. See how I, on planet Earth, should try to summarize this thing here. But what I will say, first of all, is that the entrepreneurship we've been discussing right now comes down to multiple factors, I think. And one of the things which Safi talked about was we need to have a focus. And the focus quite often is lacking. And one of the things I love him talking about was that you should be able to say no. There's a philosopher in France saying you should define who you are not, rather who you are. Well, he said in this case, if you had 20 different initiatives, define the 17s you're not going ahead with. And then he talked about the framework, making sure you talk same language. And last but not least, the frictions coming out of it, making sure that you do a small micro pilot and ensure this pilot actually is showing or testing the waters immediately. Now, one thing we did not discuss a lot, but what I would like to pull out is actually the van model. And the model which I like, the Bush van model or the Bushwell model is interesting because one of the things we talked about was, of course, the artist and the soldier. Now, this comes back to this philosophy of having the right balance. If I should bring up the entire model, I'm going to bring out all the different elements now in the model on the screen right now. What you will see here is that there is a fine balance between the artist and the soldier. And if you, like Steve Jobs, are falling in love with the artist too much, it's out of balance. It comes back to this discussion about the parachute and you being too focused on the creative side and you just dropping dead. Or the other side where technology and the structure takes over too much control and you end up by losing the creative juice. And that model is really that. So there is 4 dimensions to it. You have the chaos side, which is where you have one balance, which is a little bit too much out of balance. And then you have the Moses trap on the other side. And then, of course, you have the very little area down there where both factors are weak. That's what we call the stagnation. And in the end of the day, on the top right, you have the fine right balance between those sides. And what I think the issue is that we right now in companies are out of balance. As we are so focused on all the technology and KPIs, I think sometimes we are catering a little bit too much to one balance. And that pendulum has to get into balance right now. And that's really what the model is all about. Now, it was a horrible summary, but at least I showed you a couple of models. And with that, I'll say thank you for watching the mule summary. Marshall, did I survive or did I drown live on air?
Close enough, because staying alive.
Staying alive. That was a tough one, I have to tell you.
I think it was just fine.
Gosh, that was a tough one. You know what? What is the one thing you've learned?
You know, I think the one thing I've learned is just it's good to be around smart people that come up with a lot of great ideas. And if you just kind of hang around, you probably learn something. And if I look at my life, I mean, I've had a lot of lucky breaks, but largely it's been hanging around people that were really creative, had good ideas, and just trying to learn a little bit from them. And you know, I think you can learn so much just being around smart people. And you know, one thing we did different on this show is rather than us talking so much, which is probably a benefit for everybody, we just let them talk at each other and talk to each other. I thought that was kind of fun.
It was kind of fun. Well, listen, Marshall, you said it very well. I think we should change our format. I think we should disrupt ourselves And I can only thank two guests for that, Safi and John. Both of you, thank you so much for joining our show. Marshall, as usual, congratulations with your book today. It's the 3rd
Thank
of May
you.
today, and we are so
Yay.
excited about your book. And to the rest of you watching out there, I can only say one thing. Innovation is here to stay. We just need to keep it alive. The question is how we do it, but hopefully we're giving you a little bit of inspiration. And I hope to see you again next month with another show. Take care and bye for now.
Every day is a new challenge, right? Is a day that we can prepare ourselves even more.
This is about leadership as a mindset.
We do work that matters for people who care.
We live in the age of the idea.